Next up is Glen Howard. He's the president of the Jamestown Foundation. Hi, Glenn. Can you talk a little bit? So if Russia does go in, invasion, incursion, how strong will the resistance be? Your thoughts on that? Go ahead, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Melinda, for inviting me to be here today and speak. And also thank you to Ambassador Herbst for putting this together. Greetings to all my colleagues. First of all, I'd like to point out that many of my remarks today are based upon an op-ed that I published in The Hill that came out earlier today about providing the need to provide Stingers, air defense weaponry to Ukraine as it's urgently needed. First of all, my arguments kind of echo off a little bit of what Luke says, but Ukraine, first of all, is not Georgia. It's a population of 45 million. It's not a population of 3 million. It's the size of France, twice as big as Germany. Its military forces are 250,000 men with a 145,000 man army that's currently deployed against the Russian forces along most of its border. So the Russian army itself has about 280,000 ground forces. But when we talk about Ukraine, we need to keep in mind they've got 450,000 veterans who have served in Donbass and have military service and are not currently serving. So this is a vast manpower reserve that Ukraine can tap into, which really strengthens the argument that Ukraine doesn't need US ground forces to defend itself. What it needs is technology. So with most of its forces deployed in Donbass, Ukraine faces what I call a Russian boa constrictor that's constantly being squeezed from the north, south, and east, and it faces a very much wide multi-direction threat. So Ukraine experts believe that if Russia did come from any one of these directions, they would need at least a 3-to-1 military advantage fighting on the defensive against the Russians. And so this would do a lot to kind of tie down Russian forces, and they would need a lot of more force than they currently have. So the idea in defending itself is Ukraine is trying to turn itself into basically use Mao's maxim about the army swims with the people. And that is what Ukraine is trying to do now. It started in May 2021 by enacting territorial defense reforms that has started to implement, and sadly, it only just started implementing these recently. President Zelensky said that they would be increasing the size of the Ukrainian army by 100,000 men over the next 3 years. So that would rapidly give another large infusion of manpower into its forces. So the biggest thing for Ukraine is this technology factor because it lacks in military technology and sophisticated equipment. And so this makes it harder for Ukraine kind of to plan and defend itself. But what is ending up making the difference, and I made the argument in my Hill article, is that Ukraine now has 1,000 javelins. These are state-of-the-art weapons in the U.S. military inventory that we've given to Ukraine. This will do a lot in nullifying the Russian take advantage when and if it comes. So technology is a multiplier, and Moscow will be using something called the correlation of forces when it sits down and calculates its losses if it goes into Ukraine. So the United States and Ukraine are changing that and have changed it with the transfer of the javelins, and the British government is also changing that with the arrival of the in-laws, which are short-range anti-tank weapons that have a 600-meter range. These weapons are now in abundance in Ukrainian forces, and they will nullify any type of Russian effort to go in urban fighting in urban terrains. And so the combination of these weapons is going to make a big factor in what Ukraine has. Now, as I point out in my article, the key in the weakest links is the defense of Kiev. As we saw in the 2008 war with Georgia, the Russians will target the capital. Now, there's anybody's guess on where this attack will come, and the problem with Ukraine is going to be trying to figure out where that attack would come. But my argument is that attack through the swamps of Belarus on the border, which dominate most of the Belarus-Ukrainian border, is pretty much is unlikely because of this very factor of the terrain and making it very difficult. But the most likely avenue would be what they call the Kiev-Chernihiv axis, which is basically from the Bryansk region of Russia, and that faces the Ukrainian border, and in front of the Russians is the Kiev-Chernihiv Autobahn. Now, I'm sure Ambassador Herbst has driven down this road many times. It's 139 kilometers, 4 lanes, and you get there in about in a very quick amount of time. But the highway is flanked by heavy forests, and it makes a perfect killing zone for Russian tanks and could be Putin's highway of death, just like the Iraqi army faced in Kuwait in 1991 when they lost over 2,000 vehicles. So the Ukraine's javelin hunting forces could stop the Russian attack head on, but Moscow has the advantage in air power, and they could attack the units hiding, using the force along the Autobahn with their attack helicopters, and they could take out a lot of the advantages of the javelin hunting teams that would be there. So my argument is that if we give Ukraine and help it with the transfer of the Stingers, the man pads, that would really nullify the Russian advantage. And Lithuania and Latvia both stepped forward to send their older version of Stingers to Ukraine. And these are helpful, but Ukraine needs the more modern version of the Stingers. And so this would go into Moscow's correlation of forces and make it a big stopping factor. And in fact, it could be a deterrent already in effect, but just because Moscow knows that they have the Stingers, they know that they can scratch off that column in terms of their air dominance over Ukraine. So I'll end my talk with the following couple of recommendations. First of all, is the air defense. They need the Stingers. They need it immediately. It could turn the battlefield in Ukraine the same way it turned the battlefield in Afghanistan when we drove the Soviets out. My second point is that Ukraine has manpower. It doesn't have a shortage of forces. It needs technology, but it also needs the command and control systems that the United States can provide with its intelligence. Ukraine, biggest challenge is figuring out where, and if an attack comes, where will be the blow. They can't figure that out. It's going to be a big challenge to them, but we can do it with our intelligence. The second and third and last point I'd like to make is an airlift. Ukraine has had the image on our televisions of getting air assistance and planes arriving. We need to be doing this every 2 days. You know, I'd put tomatoes on those C-130s. I don't care what's in it, but as long as these planes are showing up every 2 days, it keeps Moscow guessing. And it's a form of deterrence, because once Moscow calculates all of these estimated weapons loads arriving, it will start thinking and scratching their head, well, maybe it's not such a good idea. So Melinda, John, thank you very much for letting me speak today.